what to look for in an LED grow light. There's so many different things that you can look for. I know you created a grow light calculator, which is awesome. Hoping you can talk about that here. But what should folks be looking for? Since you mentioned spectrum, you already talked about that as something to look at and what to look at within the spectrum. But PAR, efficiency of the fixture. I mean, we can go on and on. What are kind of like the top things people should look for? Because there are so many different things. People get confused pretty easily when it comes to shopping for an LED grow light. So break it down for us.
So first, we just got to break light into two parts. Light is a particle, light is a wave. So far, we've been talking about light as a wave. We've been talking about spectrum. We're talking about different nanometers of wavelength, red light versus blue light, how all that. That's all light as a wave. Light is also a particle, photons. And what really matters, that side, flux, what we call flux, the amount of photons basically that are hitting the plant, the amount of radiated energy that's going to be hitting the plant. That's more important for almost all reasons than spectrum. I think a lot of growers get caught up thinking about spectrum and they think about different colors of light and all of this, but the overall amount of light is what ultimately really matters. Almost every grow light has a decent enough spectrum. I don't sort of knock a lot of grow lights because they have a terrible spectrum, but I'll certainly knock them because they don't produce enough photons or they don't have enough efficiency in producing their photons. So we want to talk about counting photons and understanding how many photons your grow light will sort of produce, because there's a number. And when we're talking about micromoles, we're talking about a number of photons. So think of it as a quantity of light. So every grow light can produce a certain quantity of light per second. Okay? And that's what we call the PPF, the photosynthetic photon flux. That total amount of light that's created per second, there's different ways to measure it. You can just say, hey, I'm using these diodes that get, 3.2 micromoles per watt, and I got 100 watts, so I got 320 micromoles. You could just do a calculation like that, right? A lot of grow light companies do exactly that. And when you see a number often advertised for their PPF, that's just a calculation of what the diode could theoretically do times the number of watts that are being driven through this fixture. And it's kind of BS because it's not reality. So we call that the calculated PPF, right? Because it's not measured. It's just what they do based on the published numbers of the components that they're using. The other thing we could do to measure the amount of light that a grow light fixture creates is we could stick it in a device called an integrating sphere. And an integrating sphere measures what we call the total PPF. It actually counts each photon that comes out of that fixture. Each and every photon, no matter where it goes, basically, unless it hits the grow light fixture itself, because it's in the integrating sphere and gets converted to heat by hitting the grow light fixture itself, it's going to be counted by the integrating sphere. So we call that the total PPF. And a lot of better grow light manufacturers will sort of have their light sphere tested, and then they'll report a sphere test number, usually out to 2 or 3 decimal places. So if you see a sphere test number, they're going to advertise something like, our fixture gets 2.379 micromoles per joule. They're not just going to say 3.4 or whatever. They're going to sort of have that sort of finer granularity because they actually ran a test and they actually have something that they're reporting there. But we don't grow our plants in a sphere. We don't grow our plants on the inside of an integrating sphere. We grow our plants usually in a grow tent. So a sphere is an overcount of how many photons will actually hit your plants in a grow tent. So if you want a better understanding of sort of what a grow light is going to be able to deliver to the canopy of your garden, then you want to look at a PAR test result. A well set up PAR test can measure what we call the usable PPF. And the usable PPF is the number of photons that actually are going to hit the plants in your grow. That's what I try to measure in my PAR tests. So you set up a fixture and the way it could be used. And then you measure how many photons actually arrive to the canopy of that space. So what we're doing there is we're using a quantum sensor or a PAR sensor, which is actually measuring ppfd. The D stands for density. So the sensor doesn't count the total number of them. It doesn't know the total number of them. It just knows the number that are hitting the sensor. And it says, well, this is how dense the photons are that are basically hitting this sensor. If we take a good sample across a PAR test like that, then we can extrapolate from that density across the area, the size of the area that we know. And that gets us to the quantity, the overall quantity of light. There's a lot into PPF, but PPF, whether it's calculated PPF, whether it's total PPF, or whether it's usable PPF, are metrics to describe the total amount of light that a fixture will produce. And that's what our calculator sort of fundamentally works with, because the amount of light that a grow light fixture creates determines how much area that grow light can cover at a given density. A density of light. So if you have 1,000 micromoles of light and you want 500 micromoles per square meter of density, and you had perfect distribution, which isn't realistic, but just to say you had perfect distribution, then you could grow with 2 square meters, right? Because you have 1,000 micromoles divided by 2 square meters would be 500 micromoles per square meter. That micromoles per square meter is the ppfd measurement. And that's basically how we go from an amount of light. We have an idea of how much density we want to grow with, what the plants can tolerate, and so how much space a different grow light will be able to cover. The grow light calculator sort of works with those numbers. So if a grow light will tell you something like this grow light gets 2.8 micromoles per joule, and that might be all you know about the grow light, you should assume that that number is a calculated PPE, that's photosynthetic photon efficacy, but it relates to PPF, which is the total amount of photons. So you can take that 2.8 over to our grow light calculator. Take that 2.8 and plug that into the micromoles per joule tag. And then how many watts does the grow light say it has? It's a 100 watt light, just for simplistic reasons. So you'd put that in the watt field, and then you'd put the cost, which it just needs to do the cost efficiency. And then you'd be able to select, is this total PPF? Do I think that they actually did a sphere test? I'll call it total PPF. Do I think that this is just a number that they calculated? I'll call it calculated PPF. And the calculator will make its own conversions based on, all right, if that's calculated PPF, this is what we would expect it to be able to do in terms of usable PPF. That's one of the big things that the calculator does, is convert between those different types of PPF. And then some actually more simple calculations about how much area could this grow light cover? How much could you reasonably expect to harvest from such a grow light? Because all of that really is a function of the amount of light that you're providing to your plants. So we can have a fairly good estimate of your harvest potential, not your sort of guarantee that you'll actually hit that, but what your harvest potential is, how much coverage you could get, and break down, how efficient the light is and whether or not it's a good deal. So that's what the calculator is designed to do. And that's it. The number one thing, if you're out there shopping for a grow light, that I think you should pay attention to is the PAR map. Because the PAR map talks about the actual light that's hitting the canopy. Those numbers that you see in a PAR map are the ppfd numbers. So the density of photons at each position across that map. Good distribution. You don't want to grow. Most growers don't want to put, unless you're supplementing carbon dioxide, you're not going to want to put your plants under more than 1,000 micromoles of ppfd light, basically. And even though you can go outside in the noonday sun and measure the sun at about 2,000 ppfd, you don't want to grow plants indoors under a steady light source at higher than 1,000 ppfd, because they will have light toxicity issues if you do. Supplementing CO2 can get a little bit higher than that. So if you're evaluating a PAR map, make sure that the numbers in the middle of the PAR map aren't above 1,000. If they are, that's not a realistic map. It's also not a realistic map if they're like 500. You'd probably want more light than that. So try to find a PAR map with the center value is close to 1,000. And when the center value is close to 1,000, you want the corners to be at least 500. That's a good distribution of light. No hot spot higher than 1,000, and the lowest areas are at least 500. And that's sort of what I try to evaluate in my PAR test. Now, make sure that it's a well set up PAR test. There's any number of ways that manufacturers can sort of goose the numbers on their own tests. So where possible, use a third-party test, or at least be confident in how they set it up.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm looking at your Grow Light calculator on your website right now. And I remember when you first came out with this was awesome. One thing I really like about it is if you put the cost in there, you can see what the cost efficiency is, like how much you're paying per micromole. That's cool, because, if you're paying outrageous price for it, then the fixtures is just not worth it.
Yeah, there should be a relationship there, right? And these days, that's the best way to evaluate the cost of a grow light too, is the cost per micromole, because what you're buying is a light creating machine. So how much light can it create? And then, divide that by the purchase cost is what we do for cost efficiency. So say a light that can create 600 micromoles that costs $200, that would be a tremendous deal. That would be like, 33 cents per micromole. Which there are some lights that are getting towards that range, down into the 30 cents per micromole. When I did the Grow Light calculator, we considered anything under $1 to be a good deal. Right. And this is the sort of price drop that we were talking about, and the efficiency gain had already happened. But you go back to like 2016, 2017, 2018, if you could find a grow light that got better than 2 micromoles per watt, you could find them, but not that was less than 2 micromoles per dollar, or $2 per micromole, basically. And now you can get them for like 40 or 50 cents per micromole. Some of the best deals out there, like on sales and stuff, are down in the 30 cents per micromole. So the prices have been basically cut in a third over the last 4 or 5 years.
This clip is brought to you by AC Infinity. Use discount code MrGrow at 15 to save on any of their products.